Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is N by Stephen King. Now, N is a novella that was published in King's 2008 collection, Just After Sunset. Now, I've already reviewed N back in 2016, but I decided to redo it because I wanted to redo it. It's my channel, you can't tell me what to do. Now, N was inspired by the 1894 novel The Great God Pan by Arthur Machen. That novel was also a huge influence on H.P. Lovecraft. You could also see a Lovecraft influence on N as well. Now, N is written sort of like an epistolary where it's made up of letters sent back and forth between different characters and newspaper articles, but most of it is written as if it's the notes of a psychiatrist. Now, the plot of N is it's about a psychiatrist who's treating a patient who he simply refers to in his notes as N. But N is a man with severe OCD. Every day he has to count a certain number of things, and it always has to be an even number. And N claims that all this started when he was at this field taking pictures, and he found this strange formation of rocks. He couldn't tell if this was natural or man-made, kind of like Stonehenge. And while he was at this field, he felt that reality itself was wearing thin, that the very fabric of time and space there was so thin that you could practically punch a hole through it. And while he was there, he saw a monster, a creature so horrifying that it pretty much caused him to go insane. And N believes that if he doesn't partake in these counting rituals every day, this monster, and possibly others like it, will claw their way through into our world, and it will most likely be the end of the world as we know it. Now, at first the psychiatrist doesn't believe any of this, he believes it's all in N's mind, but as the story goes on, he gets drawn in, and delusion or not, he gets caught up in N's obsession as well. But N was a very good and very creepy psychological horror story, because throughout it you get this real sense of almost apocalyptic dread. This whole idea that the fate of the world might actually rest in this man's hands, and it's basically driving him insane. And there are some very creepy scenes in this, like there's one part where he describes seeing what looks like human faces on these stones, and he also has these nightmares about what would happen if these creatures really did come through into our world. And when he's describing this creature, you get the idea that he's only describing a part of it, as if he only saw what his mind allowed him to see. And the story is very, very Lovecraftian, because in H.P. Lovecraft's work, he wouldn't so much describe the monster, rather he would always describe the psychological dread of the protagonist seeing the monster, the idea that seeing these things would actually drive a person insane. Now, the majority of Stephen King's books and short stories interlock with each other, either by being in the same universe or the same multiverse. This novella appears to be in the same universe as Stephen King's novel Under the Dome, because at the end of this there's an article written by Julia Shumway, who is one of the main characters of Under the Dome. Presumably this story is taking place prior to the events of that novel. The book also appears to have some definite Dark Tower connections. Dark Tower is a sci-fi fantasy series that's primarily set in an alternate universe known as Midworld, but the series primarily deals with the concept of alternate timelines and other dimensions. And when N is describing this field and describing reality in this field as being thin, that's kind of implying that this field might be home to what Roland Deschain, the main character of the Dark Tower series, calls a thinny. Now, in the Dark Tower series, a thinny is basically when two universes, rub up against each other, causing the fabric of time and space to wear thin. Also in the Dark Tower series, you find out that there are these spaces between the worlds, known as the Ta-Darkness, which are these spaces filled with monsters, demons, and evil gods. And perhaps this monster that N sees is actually a creature from the Ta-Darkness. Now, Stephen King's novel It also also ties in with the Dark Tower series, and in it you find out that Pennywise, or It, is actually from another dimension known as the Macroverse, and some people have theorized that there might be a connection between the Macroverse and the Ta-Darkness. Also, there are points in this novella where N does refer to this creature as It. Now, there are other creatures from the Stephen King mythos that are implied to be the same type of creature as It as well, like He Who Walks Behind the Rose from Children of the Corn, or the Boogeyman from King's short story The Boogeyman, or the Crimson King from the Dark Tower series. Also in this novella, N says that he's from the town of Castle Rock, which is a town that's appeared in many of Stephen King's books like The Dead Zone, Cujo, The Body, The Dark Half, Needful Things, and many others. Now, Marvel Comics also did a digital graphic novel based on this novella. But once again, I highly recommend N. Now, in terms of the other stories in Just After Sunset, I only read 2 of the other stories in this book. I've read Graduation Afternoon, which there's nothing supernatural in this story at all, but it has probably one of the scariest endings in any of Stephen King's stories because it's something that could actually happen. It's something that hopefully will never happen, but again, it's something that could happen. The other story in here that I read is The Cat from Hell, which was actually originally published in the 80s, and it was adapted into one of the segments of the anthology film Tales from the Dark Side, the movie. Cat from Hell is also a pretty awesome story, but one day I might actually read all the stories in this collection and review the whole collection proper. Now, before I end this video, I want to cut to my friend Chris giving his thoughts on N. He's also going to give his thoughts on some of the other stories in Just After Sunset as well.
I like the stories where you see Lovecraft like all over it, you know. N is a good example because it's about the fringes of the world and the places where things are held together, but at the same time where things are starting to fall apart. And that field is obviously where, I think it was best said in Black House, it's a place where slippage occurs, where you start to see in between worlds and into the void. And it's got that scary kind of classic concept of we're just lost on a little blue world and we're surrounded by just a pit full of like monsters and scary shit. And you know, it's that weird kind of cosmic horror where, you know, we're kind of trapped in our existence and we're at the mercy of things that we don't understand. Things that if we tried to comprehend, they would drive us totally nuts. You know, it's Stephen doing his own take on that old kind of Lovecraft and Arthur Machen kind of thing, where we're kind of just we're here to be at the mercy of very scary shit. I love the epistolary style. That's a huge throwback to Lovecraft because it was always like a person who witnessed some crazy shit writing down some stuff that happened. And it makes things a little creepier when you think about it, because kind of reading what somebody wrote offhand rather than reading prose, it makes it feel more real, you know, and it makes it feel like you're talking to a friend, you know, like one of those old Edgar Allan Poe stories like Telltale Heart, or like Cask of Amontillado, you know, this person dictating all this crazy shit that happened. It's a lot more conversational and a lot more intimate than just a writer writing prose. Outside of that, it's just a really well written story. You know, so some crazy shit is happening. It's spreading like a virus, and it's more than likely just going to keep going and going and going until like it wipes out just a shitload of people. I feel like a lot of people think N is probably like the definitive story of the collection. I don't know how like I would personally perceive it. I mean, I like it a lot, but I'm never bold enough to say like what the best story in a collection is. I can say that it's definitely one of my favorites, but it's kind of hard to choose because this is one of his more underrated collections, Just After Sunset. But yes, N is definitely in like the top 5. Rest Stop I like because I love it when Stephen writes stories that are essentially DID, you know, about dissociative personalities. We have Dark Half, we got, you know, like Secret Window, and of course, Susanna from Dark Tower. This is kind of a more like a slice of life version of that kind of story, though. This is more, here's a dude that kind of bounces between it, almost not even at will, just when something kind of pisses him off. And the irony that we find at the end, you know, when he goes home from beating the shit out of somebody, he goes home, he kind of slips back into his normal personality, and he like locks his doors and arms his security system, you know, in case like whatever this dude followed him or some shit, or just out of fear in general. You know, it's a cool, it's like a funny contrast to what just happened. We just watched him flat out dom a dude in a rest stop parking lot, you know. It's got like shades of Bachman, you know, because it's not horrific. It's more just kind of that, like, that straightforward, like gritty kind of crime story. It's very simple and very cool. And I think Stephen his work with short stories is kind of masterworks, honestly, because it's a very different format from full-size novels. It's got to be very tight, very kind of, not fast-paced, but it has to tell a lot in a short amount of time. So there is kind of an art to it. And Rest Stop is a good example of a short story that is very simple, isn't going too deep in anything. It's kind of just a character study. And, you know, it's not even particularly horrific. It's just like this really kind of weird story about a guy with DID, you know, and how a day in his life looks, you know, as a dude who travels and all that. And, you know, something I like about this collection is this one in particular is all about those kind of simple, straightforward stories. There's horror stories, but I like when he kind of switches up genres a little bit and does something different. You know, the way that me and Christian talked about the Jaunt from Skeleton Crew tells you, like, yeah, you know, we love it when he goes outside his boundaries, you know. And Cat from Hell, that's another simple one. You know, it's just basically this cat has come to punish a dude for what he's done in life. You know, it's a weird, like, high concept thing, but it works actually pretty well, and it ends pretty damn horrifically. Very different from the way the Tales from the Dark Side did it, as much as that movie is awesome and did it its own very cool version of that. This is just that simple, like, you versus a monster kind of story, you know, that old age of, you know, all right, this is the shit that lies in the dark, you know, and how are you going to fight it? And this is a freakier version of that because he fails miserably. He gets he gets really fucked up, you know, and dies very painfully. And the cat is on the loose. It's coming after its owner, and it's going to do what it wants to do. So it's kind of silly, but it's also creepy at the same time. And I mean, yeah, just don't piss off cats, guys. Harvey's Dream is a great example of kind of handing your reader the pieces and seeing if they can put it together. And something that is a lesser appreciated aspect of Stephen's writing is kind of the horrors of mental illness. Harvey is starting to develop Alzheimer's. His perceptions are starting to freak out, and unfortunately, because he's not, his cognitive problems are becoming bigger and bigger, he does not realize that what just happened was not a dream. It actually happened. He does not understand that his daughter has really passed away. He doesn't get it. And I guess it's up to the reader as to whether or not her kind of breakdown at the end, whether or not that's in reaction to her daughter or to Harvey or to both. But that is a really horrible 1-2 punch, that both your daughter is dead and your husband basically his mind is slowly decaying. You know, I love it when writers are perceptive enough to be able to contrast the ridiculous kind of out there horror that you see in novels and you see in movies, being able to contrast that with real world horror, you know, the stuff that we're really scared of in real life, which is someone you love dies, someone you love develops a mental illness, or, you know, like a terminal illness, something like that. It's 1,000 times worse than any kind of monster you'd fight, you know, any kind of cat from hell. You know, this is the real issues that people deal with every day. And it's scary, you know, and it's tough. It's really hard to deal with. Alzheimer's is a very heartbreaking thing because you're slowly watching someone you love turn into a lesser version of themselves, as maybe as rude as that is to say. It's very heartbreaking, and they break down, and they're just not the same people anymore, you know, because they can't remember anything, and they don't. Every day is like a brand new day, you know. You're not dealing with the same person. Stephen did a really good job of having that emotional 1-2 punch at the end, and it's a very different real world kind of horror, and I appreciate it for that reason, because it's not the kind of thing you'd expect to see in this kind of collection, you know. Just After Sunset, I think, is probably his most underrated collection. And, I mean, my personal favorite, I think, is Bizarre Bad Dreams. But that's another story. But, you know, if you're listening to these and you haven't heard these stories and you've never read Just After Sunset, you are missing out. Seriously, it's a brisk read, even though it's like a bunch of stories all compiled together. Definitely check it out if you get the chance.
So, I hope you enjoyed Chris's take on this story and some of the other stories in here, and that was my review on N by Stephen King, and long days and pleasant nights to you.